Just like to start by thanking Jan and Imagine More for inviting us along today to tell our story. As she said, we're from Western Australia, and I don't know if all of you have been there, but it's a long way from here. I'm sure we aren't the people who travelled the furthest to be here, but we've now discovered why most of our federal politicians don't know where Western Australia is, let alone where Perth is. I also note that John was said he had some concerns about the time slot that he had before morning tea. And for those who present from time to time, you'll know that this is probably the toughest time slot you'll get because people have had a long morning and have a belly full of food now. And so we'll try to keep you awake at least. And if you feel the need for a nap, feel free to do that as well. We were inspired by Sean and Lisa's story this morning, and I think what you'll see from their story to ours is quite a contrast. It also reinforced for us, I guess, that we should have started a bit earlier in our journey with our family and starting to consider creating intentional relationships and roles that added value to not only our son Cameron's life, but to our lives as well, because they're all so intertwined. I guess we named this presentation, The Answer is Ours to Discover, because in Western Australia, and I don't know what your experience here is, but in Western Australia, the bureaucratic approach to people with profound disability, and as you will hear from Anthea soon, a person that has an interesting way of expressing themselves, was full institutionalisation. So the plan for our son, and in some ways, in some levels for us, was isolation, segregation, congregation, and a wasted life. But we refused to let that happen to our son and to ourselves, so we took the initiative and decided that we'd better do something and do it quick. So the way that we do this is a bit of a tag team arrangement. Anthea will introduce our family, and then she'll talk more specifically about our son Cameron. And I'll talk about life when we compare the children's lives. We have lots of kids that Anthea will explain in a minute. And Anthea will also talk a little bit about person-centred planning, and I'll talk about Cameron's support team, or support crew as we call them. And Anthea will sum it up and let you know what Cameron's up to these days, because this has been a fairly long journey for us. So I will hand you over to Anthea.
Do a slide.
I'm assuming, there you go.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to firstly introduce you to our family. So can you all hear me okay? Is this right? Okay. We're a blended family. We have 7 children between us, and this picture really is everybody. We have grandchildren as well now. Cameron, as you can see, is the handsome young man right in the middle, enjoying a bit of life. All of our kids have a lot to bring to our family. They all have their unique personalities, and Cameron is just really one of the bunch. But Cameron today lives a really, truly meaningful life. The person you see there, he's very happy, content. It's a far cry from what it was when he was young. So I just wanted to point out the difference is quite enormous. Okay, we can move on to the next slide, I think. Yeah. So Cameron these days is happy. He's a proud business owner. He's a member of his community and quite well known. And I guess the contrast being that when he was young, his biggest this is not going well.
Disability.
So Cameron, his behaviour was really what excluded him from participating in life. So Cameron has a number of challenges in his life, and I'm just going to point them out to you in a way because I need you to understand how he was then compared to how he is now. So Cameron, as a young child, he's not able to speak. Cameron needs support for just about everything. So he needs assistance for eating, for getting changed, for going out into the community, and he still receives support for those daily activities. But as an individual, he's grown, and the issues around his behaviour and him being able to access school and community and life in general because of his behaviour has diminished incredibly since then. So yeah, in the early years when Cameron was born, he was born with an intellectual disability, and I guess we tried to access the regular community options of going down to the playgroup. We were excluded from that as well. But his life basically was centred around things like early intervention therapies, many doctors and professionals, lots of therapy, medical appointments and the like. He was treated differently to others, and I think, Alistair, who's a bit younger than Cameron, tagged along for all of the appointments and everything. But that was life for us back then. You go for a little bit because I've lost my track.
Okay. So we just wanted to let you know that life in the early days for us was difficult. Cameron's wasn't able to speak, as Anthea said, so he expressed himself through his behaviour. And just as an example, just going to school took us 3 hours to get him ready in the morning. So we had to get up reasonably early to get him dressed, and just dressed and breakfast and so forth took 3 hours because he simply didn't want to go to school. He hated school. He wasn't welcome in his school, so he fought us tooth and nail. And schooling for Cameron and for our family was a challenge, to say the least. It was excruciating, and we couldn't wait for him to leave, unlike most other parents. Just to give you a bit of an example also about what Auntie was describing, our other children were obviously born. We had congratulations, there was local playgroups, there was child health nurses, there was a safe assumption that they would go to the local kindergarten, they got invitations from other mums to socialise, etc., etc. Cameron's life was very different in that, obviously he was born, there was a lot of doctors and nurses and specialists, there was a lot of therapy, and as he grew up, everything became therapy. He didn't do anything without therapy attached to it. There was actually sympathy from family and friends that said, oh my God, he's got a disability, that isn't that terrible. He was certainly at risk, at huge risk of exclusion. He entered something that we called human servicehood. There was teams of people around Cameron that were from various therapists and medical groups and so forth, and there was funding for childcare and so forth, specialist playgroups. SNIS was a program for kids with disabilities in Western Australia to go to daycare. It just went on and on. The possibility of social isolation for not only Cameron but ourselves, and he was directed eventually to special education. And during all this, what we discovered was if we didn't do something pretty quickly, then his life was headed to institutional group homes, he would be alienated, financial insecurity, etc., etc. And we needed to make sure that that railway track, as we depicted there, bent back up to a more fulfilling life with people who care, and he could have financial security. So we needed a plan, and we needed it quick, because he was 2 years. This all started, dawned on us, I guess, in some ways, 2 years before he left school. And we thought, if we don't do something now, we're going to be in trouble. One of us is going to have to leave work. And not only will Cameron live in probably social and financial poverty, but so will our family. So we needed to do something and do it quickly. So I guess we were lucky enough to have been exposed to people like John, who was here this morning, Eddie Bartnick from Western Australia, Michael Kendrick, those sorts of people who had a recipe almost for us to consider about how we might go about changing the future for our son and ourselves. And part of that was what people describe as person-centred planning. So we embarked on a person-centred planning process. Do you want to describe that? Okay, so here it is. Some of you may have experienced this. It's basically ensuring that you get a group of people together that understand Cameron, know who he is, and have a vision for his life that was very different to the vision that the system had for him. We wanted what I think has been described a couple of times today as a typical life experience for Cameron. So we used the person-centred planning tool to do that. We gathered some people together and we jotted down all the gifts and talents and opportunities and so forth that Cameron had. One of the things that we also recognised during this process was that we had to have like-minded people with us. We had spent too much time trying to convince others that Cameron could work and he could have a life outside of institutional care. So it did cost us some relationships as we moved through this process as well. For example, his aunt was one of those people that doubted, that said, you know, it's unfair to expect these things of Cameron, that he should go to a group home like all those people go to, and that he should live that life, and you should leave him alone. And we had to exclude her from this process, and that cost us the friendship with her. And we don't see her to this day, unfortunately. But we simply did not have the energy to carry on with people that were doubters. Somebody said this morning, you really have to have believers around you. Nothing is more true than that. We had to have believers around us. And the reason also that we wanted to give you some background about Cameron was we have presented in the past where people have come up to us and said, well, that's all okay for your son, but my son, you know, his behaviour is this and her behaviour is that and so forth. And we just needed you to understand that Cameron did express himself through his behaviour. He would kick, spit, punch, pull your hair. His mother was always covered in bruises. We couldn't answer the telephone. He would go into meltdown for 3, 4 and 5 hours at a time. So it wasn't easy in those days, there's no doubt. And I guess the education department found it even more difficult for some reason. All the professionals, we were handling it at home, but the professionals couldn't handle it in the education system. So he was excluded from that system, so much so that he wasn't allowed to go to just about any, well, he didn't go to any camps or any functions, or they were, in fact, in one school that we tried, that was a private school, we went there one day to pick him up, and they had him in the janitor's room with a support worker, and that's where he was being educated by himself, in the janitor's room. So those experiences taught us that if we didn't do something ourselves, that Cameron's life would turn out to be what I think is quite tragic. We need to also understand him and what his aspirations and goals were, and make sure that they were as typical as we could make them, as our other kids were experiencing. So one of the strategies we used, not unlike some other people this morning described, we got in those days we didn't know anything about support circles and all that sort of stuff. It didn't kind of exist. But we kind of had a bit of a clue that if we didn't get some people around us that understood what we were going through and understood where we wanted to be, then we couldn't do this alone. It was just too big a task. So what we did was we went out and we found some people to be part of that. And this is what we call Cameron Support Crew. And these people are made up of some people, some of them are family, so aunts and uncles. Some people are past support workers. We purposely went out to find some young people as well, because I'm not as young as I used to be. You'll be surprised to know. And we had some older people in the group as well. And we wanted to find people who would view the world from Cameron's lenses almost, a young person's lens. So we went out and found those people. We also thought that because of Cameron's, the number of challenges he had and his experience in the education world, which really didn't prepare him for anything, we would need somebody, and we thought we would have to create something that didn't exist currently in WA, because there was no employer that would employ Cameron. There was no obvious skills at the time that we could sell to an employer that would be meaningful to them or meaningful to Cameron. So we thought that we would need to create something that didn't exist. So we got some people who actually were small business owners, because we were not. So we knew nothing about small businesses and how to create them. But what we did know is if we were going to create something for Cameron, it would be the same as any other small business in this country. It wouldn't be something different. Okay, some people call it micro-business and use that sort of language. We don't use that language because quickly people become the others. So language is really, really important. So we decided not to use that sort of language and not to go down that path. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we decided that we would stick with the typical language and the typical experiences that everybody else had in this country when they were developing small business enterprise. One of the things that we thought we'd better do pretty quickly when we invited people into Cameron's life to make some decisions for him is write down what we called a set of guiding principles. Principles that we could test our assumptions about when we were making decisions for his life. And as it turns out, that was a very, very good thing to do right at the beginning, because it doesn't take too much time to deviate from what you originally thought you were going to do with a group of people. So just as an example, the guiding principles that we came up with is that Cameron support members, group members, are working together because they have a deep desire to assist Cameron to plan his future. And it was remiss of me to tell you why Cameron isn't here today to assist us with this. Clearly, as Anthea said, Cameron is non-verbal, doesn't like big crowds as well. He would not be comfortable in a room this big with all these people here. And we're confident that Cameron doesn't mind us relaying his story to you. Cameron's support crew members will work together to action plans developed for Cameron in a timely manner. So we didn't want people who were going to say, oh yeah, that's all good and fine, and sit on their hands and do nothing. This was urgent for us. We only had 2 short years to make sure that we could come up with something that wasn't just meaningful to us, but had to be meaningful to Cameron and meaningful to prospective customers.
Just going back a step, when we were working through the person-centred planning process, it was a fantastic day. Everyone signed up to do things, and what we found happened was everything fell back onto me to follow up with everybody to get on and do the things I said they would do. So this whole concept of Cameron Support Crew really was about bringing people together in a meaningful way so that they would engage in this, and we would all do it as a group. There's another principle coming up, you'll see. Yeah.
Yes, it's a good point, because like most of the parents in this room would have experienced, people come up with all sorts of ideas, including service providers and so forth, but you're left holding the bag, basically. You're the one that needs to go and make it all happen. So we wanted people that were motivated enough to actually be part of the doing as well. Cameron's support crew members believe that he has the capacity to participate in making decisions for his future. Cameron's capacity will be acknowledged, respected and demonstrated in all dealings of the crew. And Cameron comes to, although Cameron can't speak, he can certainly let you know how he feels through his behaviour, and he comes to all of these meetings. Now, when I say these meetings, this has been going on for like 9 years now, and these people are still together, okay? All decisions made by Cameron's support crew will demonstrate regard for Cameron's safety, comfort and dignity. The reason that we were explicit about these things is because one of the, and I'll go through it in a minute, let's just carry on. All support services will be customised and individualised for Cameron with a focus on expanding Cameron's personal community and his social connections. So not only were we interested in meaningful employment that was going to give him an income and so forth, but we also were very interested in his other connections, so his social connections and his community connections, and the way that he was going to give back to the community as well. Okay. All members of Cameron's support crew will conduct their business in a spirit of mutual respect, cooperation and collaboration. So we wanted to lay some ground rules, I guess, for how we were going to work together as well, not just about the outcomes for Cameron. All paid services developed and or contracted for Cameron will be customised and individualised for Cameron and not just based on availability. What we were experiencing in our state was just that. It wasn't really customised, although people used those words, and individualised. Nothing was particularly individualised. It was just who was available on the day, and that's what you got. And we certainly didn't want that for Cameron because Cameron is a very shy man as well, and he doesn't respond well to change, a lot of change. It certainly doesn't respond well to somebody knocking on the door saying, let's go out when he doesn't know them, for example, or let's do your personal care, etc. Members of Cameron's support crew will base their decisions about people and or agencies who are engaged to support Cameron on their capacity to demonstrate and prove a proven ability to provide services as identified by the crew. These services will be person-centred. That was about people who actually knew what they were doing and had a track record of being able to provide the outcomes we were looking for Cameron. Because there was a lot of new people in Western Australia starting up and didn't really have a track record of their work. People who work with Cameron will not be attached to the setting which Cameron lives, works or recreates. Their primary relationship is with Cameron, okay? So that means that he was, if he was recreating in a certain place, they didn't work for the recreation organisation he was recreating in. They actually worked for us or for him. That brought about a lot of different outcomes for Cameron, that's for sure. So supports created for Cameron will facilitate a typical life experience, including risk-taking, relationship development, being involved in his community and community involvement. And again, that was really important to be explicit about because we did want a typical life. We weren't asking for the lotto life. That was not what we were asking for. We were asking for a typical life, not unlike what was described this morning. This was the most interesting principle we came up with, and I guess all the other principles set the groundwork for us to consider this one. And this one probably, as we've gone around not only Australia, but certainly Western Australia and talked to parents about, this one was probably the most controversial principle we came up with. And that is that all Cameron's crew will sit at the table with equal authority in making decisions for Cameron's future. Now, as it turned out, this was the most important principle we came up with because people were committed to making sure that the decisions that they made had a significant impact on his future and weren't just sitting there giving suggestions to his parents to make a decision about. Everybody had the same authority, so everybody's opinions were equal. It wasn't just Anthony and I sitting at the head of the table saying, give us suggestions and we'll make a decision. It had to be an equal process. Otherwise, people could have said, well, I'll just email you some suggestions because this is lip service. This is not real. I'm not really part of this decision-making process. That was hard for us as well because you know, he's a vulnerable young man, and we were just embarking in on this process, and we thought, well, we're confident that the people that we've got around us won't make inappropriate decisions, and it had to be unanimous. When people came up with the young people, most likely came up with the more risky kind of decisions about what he should be doing in his recreation, etc. But if anybody came up with a suggestion, there had to be a plan around that suggestion anyway, and strategies to reduce risk and so forth. But that was one of the most important principles we came up to, and we actually stuck to that principle. So we didn't make all the decisions, and we certainly don't now that he's a grown man. So, and as the decisions were starting to be made, we tested it against all these principles, and I think it held us in good stead to have written them all down. So the other thing about his support crew is we needed to make sure that they were not only committed, but we were having fun together. There's nothing worse than coming with an agenda and it's all work, work, work. And so what we did was there was a lot of food, a lot of wine, a lot of fun as well. We also did a couple of road trips a year. Cameron's aunt owned a farm down south of Perth, so we packed everybody on buses and so forth, and we went off down south and we had our meetings there and barbecues and so forth. We met regularly throughout the year because there was a lot of decisions to be made in a short period of time. and like I said, in various venues. Just a quick story about the importance of having this group of people around Cameron. I think we talked, Lisa talked this morning about the importance of leavers when people leave school. And because Cameron was never allowed to do anything, when it came to leavers, they said that he couldn't participate in that either. One of the young women, Emily, in this bottom picture here, she was part of Cameron's support crew, and she was absolutely outraged by that. And she went and she worked in a gas and oil company, and she went and told her boss this story about this young man that she was working with in his support crew, and that the school wouldn't let him go to leavers. And of course, probably most of us in this room went to leavers when we were going to school. And it's a rite of passage. It's the next step in life. It's almost, you know, here's the leavers thing, now you go on to higher education or adulthood or whatever. But Cameron wasn't allowed to do that. So her boss said, I will give you a week off, paid leave, if you go out and make this happen for this young man. And she did. To her credit, she absolutely did. She got some of his friends and some of her friends and some young people together, and off they went down south. And I don't know whether you know anything about Western Australian leavers, but they go down to Dunsborough and places like that, and they cause havoc and so forth, drink a lot and so forth. And they went off and did that together. So Cameron actually did have a leavers. It wasn't as big as some of the other leavers groups, but he had a great time, and he spent some time with his friends.
I might just add there too. So Cameron, in going away with these people, demonstrated to us that he was capable of doing a lot more than we had expected. So, I mean, Cameron's very unstable on his feet and has epilepsies. The venue they chose to take him to was up a number of steps. I mean, and there was glass around. We would always worry because he has a very spontaneous reaction when there are loud noises, and, you know, it's easy for him to break things. And they went to a restaurant, there's wine glasses and everything, and none of those things happened. You know, we always believed in raising the bar and keeping our expectations high, and these guys just proved through and through that Cam was more than capable of behaving and being like everybody else.
It's an important point because Cameron, not unlike everybody else in some ways, either lives up or down to your expectations. And unfortunately, his experience with the education department, they had no expectations of Cameron, none at all. They didn't think that Cameron would be able to do anything, so they didn't bother educating him. Cameron left school with no friends at all, not one. Okay, the only people in his life was us, nobody else. And it took a long time for us to build up that support for him.
Yeah. He did leave school with a file about this big and 1,000 stories we could write a book with, but we really have glossed over that because it would take a long time to tell.
They excluded him from everything, including opportunity. An opportunity to form any type of friendship was ignored, mostly because they thought Cameron couldn't be a friend to anybody because he would pull your hair or spit at you or kick you or whatever. We've certainly proven them wrong, thankfully. And the way that we did that was we thought, well, most of us get friendships and social connection and community connection. A big part of that is work. Everybody said Cameron couldn't work. What could he possibly do? He should be at a day centre with 2 or 3 large men like my good self to keep him under control. And this is when our 7-year-old was taking him across to the local park playing by himself. But no, the system said no, he would need at least 2, if not 3 big men with him all the time to keep him under control. We knew that was not true. But the struggle that we had was, his life experience, he's now 16, 17 years old. He has little to no recognisable skills, no recognisable relationships. Where do you start? But we thought, well, why don't we create a business for him to leave school? So when he leaves school, he goes straight into his own business and he starts work. But what would he do? He didn't have any recognisable skills, so what could we possibly do to help him create this business? Thankfully, we had a lot of people in his support crew that were absolutely committed believers. And one day for a period of time, we were doing some major renovations to our home. And when we came to the end of that, we decided to put the Foxtel off. This is in the day when it was reasonably new. And when you I'm sure you've all experienced this. You ring them up and you say, when can you come? And they say, well, be home between 9 and 12 or 12 and 5. And I said, well, you must mean Saturday then. And they said, no, during the week we don't work on Saturdays. And as I was having this conversation with this man, I was looking at Cameron. He was sitting on the lounge and he was waiting for a support worker to come and take him out. And it dawned on me that Cameron had been waiting all his life to get a life because he simply didn't have one. So I took this idea to the support crew and I said, Cameron's really good at waiting. That's his one fantastic skill. He waits all the time for everything. Waits us to get him up in the morning, waits for us to give him breakfast, waits for him to get dressed, waits for him to go to school. He's waiting. So with that small idea, we created a business. And it's a waiting service. And he does it, he's been doing it for 9 years now. And the idea was, if you go to Harvey Norman, you have Harvey Norman here, I'm assuming, and you buy your fridge and your colour TV, and they need to deliver it, they will say, just like the Foxtel guy, they will say, be home between 9 and 12 or 12 and 5. And most people can't do that because they have to work, and they don't do it on Saturdays. So Cameron comes and does the waiting for you, for a fee. And while he's there, he has a list of things that he can do for you, like clean your car if it's there, get the cobwebs down, clean the driveway, do the edges, stuff like that, sweep the leaves. And all those things that when you come home on weekends you don't want to do yourself because that's leisure time for you. So we've, 10 minutes, okay, we've created a whole business around that. And like I said, Cameron's been doing this for 9 years. And he's been doing it very successfully to the point where he no longer will need his pension soon. And a lot of parents went, don't, disability support pension, don't give that up, takes too much time to get back. But I think anybody on welfare of that nature wants to get off. They don't want to spend the rest of their lives on welfare. People want to be valued, want valued roles, and one of them is to be fully employed and self-sufficient financially. And that's certainly what we were striving for Cameron. And we're about to achieve that. Cameron has contracts for, we also, one of the things we did do, that was the subcommittee that worked together to to plan for the business. One of the things that we did first for the support group was we wrote down a whole bunch of principles which we've already gone through. So we thought it was a good idea to do the same thing for when we created the business for Cameron. So we wrote, I don't have time to go through all of these, but we wrote down a number of principles. I think I was standing at a forum once and I said in the support crew there was 12 principles, not unlike the 12 commandments. And somebody in the front row said, I think there was only 10. There clearly should have been 12. But so these are some of the principles, and I, again, won't have time to go through them all. But basically it was part of a process where we could go back again when we were creating this business and test our assumptions against those principles. And it was an interesting thing to do because not only did the business need to be meaningful to Cameron, and he needed meaningful involvement, but it also needed to be meaningful to the outside world because the whole plan was for him to make money. It wasn't about doing voluntary work all the time, or it wasn't about, maybe, doing a little bit here and a little bit there. It was about having a real meaningful job, which he has. This is it, CamCan Services, that's his website. So those people here, if there's anybody from Western Australia, please don't hesitate to use CamCan Services. He has had contracts he had a vending machine contract for some time where he would go and get the money for the guy that owned all the vending machines, and he would replace the Coke or the chips or whatever. Not that he liked gardening all that much, to be honest, and I must admit I don't either, but he quite enjoyed being amongst the leaves and raking and things like that. He also liked to be on the farm, so sometimes he'd spend some time on the farm gaining some skills. He also, don't ask me why, but he loves washing cars. Absolutely loves it. Anything with water, Cameron really enjoys. And he particularly enjoys hosing not only the car down, but his support workers and anybody else in the vicinity. He particularly likes that. Really tickles him. Tickles me too, by the way. And he's got a significant contract now cleaning a fleet of cars. So he looks after a fleet of cars for a company who provide him with quite a reasonable income now, which is fantastic. You want to add anything?
I was just going to add to that. So Cameron, over the years, his skills have improved radically. So his attention span has improved. He walks proud, you know, he holds his head high. He used to be slumped over all the time. When he's got his work clothes on, he knows exactly what's happening. He knows where he's going. He's got his kit for car cleaning, whatever it might be. He just knows the way the day is laid out. But one of the keys is having a really good match of support people with him, and they are the quality control to the work that he does. So if he's having a day where he's, you know, not as focused as he might be some other times, it's their responsibility to ensure the job is done properly.
And nobody thought Cameron could do this. And to be honest, and we are honest people, trust me, he surprised us as well. We always thought our expectations were pretty high. But as Cameron got involved with this, and he had friendships that were developing, he had people around that were welcoming, he had significant relationships forming, his behaviour diminished significantly. But his enjoyment, and I know that John said goal shouldn't be happiness, but by ensuring that he had all these opportunities, his happiness was clearly expanded as well. And like Anthea said, he would never look you in the eye. He was always hunched over. He used to walk on his feet and his hands. And now he stands up strong and proud. He's a proud business owner and young man. His business, he volunteers at the local yacht club as well, which he's been doing for quite a number of years, and he's formed a lot of very strong relationships down there. This is his business cards and so forth. Your time is my business. Clever. He has, the business is also created as a small Australian business enterprise like any other. He has a business plan, he has a marketing plan, he has workers' compensation, public liability, he has promotional items, and he also has a coordinator. Because at the time, we were not only his parents, his carers, but we were also his business partners. And we didn't want to continue to do that. It was too time consuming, so we decided not to. So he has a coordinator, coordinates all that stuff. We don't do any of that anymore. At the same time as we were doing all this, he had an opportunity to move out of home, and we'll have to skim through this. I'm sorry, we're summarising, years of work in 40 minutes and 45 minutes, so it's pretty difficult. He had an opportunity to leave home. Do you want to do this? Okay, so he had an opportunity to leave home. We didn't have any resources, we didn't have any funding or anything, so we thought, well, how could we make this happen? We also didn't have much funding to create the work either, the business. So we decided he had an opportunity, he found a home, and we just advertised for somebody to come and live with him. Not somebody with a disability, just a person in the community. We were very lucky to find Tupia, that's the guy down there, who shares with Cameron. We've been together for about 9 years now. And Tupia does not do any personal care or anything. Tupia is his housemate, okay? They share their lives together, that's all. They share meals together, they go out together, they play music together. Tupia is a musician, and Cameron loves music. So they hang out together, and often Tupia will say, don't bring the support today because Cameron and I are going to go and watch the footy. So we don't need the support today. They hang out together. Cameron has also established a significant number of relationships that have been enduring for the last 8 or 9 years now, which is fantastic. We did intentional relationship building because this lady down here, the older lady, lived next door to Cameron, and Irene had an issue with her gardening, and the guys had an issue with cooking. Irene loved cooking, and the guys didn't mind gardening. So they swapped. Okay, she did all the cooking for them, they did all her gardening, which was a fantastic outcome for both of them. The reason that we found out that they weren't very good cooks is that we, I don't know whether but you can get the fire alarms attached to your mobile phone. It was one of the strategies for when Cameron was home alone. And of course, it kept going off, so we'd ring Tupia and say, what's going on? And he said, oh, I'm cooking something and I'm burning it again. So we discovered pretty quickly that he was not a great cook. Cameron has gone on all sorts of trips. That's him playing the drums. He does all sorts of recreational activities as well, not like everybody else. And he started to travel. We didn't know whether we could ever get him in the plane and all that sort of stuff, but the support crew said, no, we're going to do this. So all we did was kept visiting the airport, kept lining him up and then bringing him out and getting the airline ready, just in case. And he was fantastic. Went to Broome, had a great day. week or so, and was fine. There was no problems at all with Cameron. Just to let you know also, because we had nothing else to do, we were interested in getting a disability service provider to support Cameron. He got some funding from the Disability Services Commission, now the NDIS, and we're having just as much trouble with the NDIS as you guys. You'll be glad to know, and we've only just jumped in WA. But we couldn't find a service provider that we could trust. It was just simple as that. We really wanted somebody, an organisation that followed all those principles that we came up with that would provide Cameron with a good life. We couldn't find one. So we started one. We started CamCan and Associates about 7 years ago now, and we have 300 members that we provide services to, and 500 staff. So that's gone along very, very well. So Cameron now, there he is. You want to end it?
Yeah. So Cam is still, getting on with his own life. He has his own business, quite independent of CamCan and Associates. I think Cam is pretty inspirational. I love looking back at the story, and I'm sorry I got a bit stuck at the beginning, but it's quite emotional. We don't do this a lot, and when we go back and look at the photos, it's a journey back in time. And I listened to a lot of your families today speaking, and people, really making an effort to create a good life for their family and their family members. And I must say, it's a ton of work, but it's so worth investing in because the outcomes are amazing. Just giving people a chance to be like everybody else is so worth it. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to conclude also, this is not the easiest road to go down. It's easy to hand our sons and daughters over to the system, but the outcomes, I think Cameron's a good example of outcomes being significantly different if you go down this road. Cameron has taught us so much during this process, and we have people not unlike the other presenters this morning where they've come up to us over a number of years and said, I can't believe how much Cameron has taught me as a person. Three of the most important components, obviously, was his support crew. It was, we never take a work off table for anybody. We have people who have profound disability in WA that we have helped find work or create their own work. Through our work with CamCan and Associates, and his home life. So it's everything really. It's not just work, it's not just his home, it's not just about relationships, it's about the whole package. And it is difficult, but the outcome is significantly different, as I said. So thank you for listening.